Hi everyone, my name is Lisa, and in this video I want to talk about what product managers are doing. I work as a product manager and I just want to share my experience in case you are interested to pursue this job, or maybe you're already working as a product manager and then we could exchange our experience. So what I see generally that the role of product manager can be really different depending on the company, in particular depending on the company size. So if it's a large company, what I observe, you would be more likely focusing on the roadmap and user experience and really defining what needs to be done. Also, if you're working for the big company, I assume you would not own really like the whole product, but rather some part of it, or in other words, some part of the user experience. On the other hand, in smaller companies, more likely you will really own a product and be some kind of a CEO of a product, or at least a major part of it. So I'm working for a small company and this is exactly the case for me. So I really involved from the ideation up to rollout, and not just for some part of the user experience or some particular features, but also for the whole product as it is. But let's start from the very beginning. So what do product manager actually do and what he or she is responsible for? So the main question that the product manager has to answer is what needs to be built. And to find the right answer to this question, of course, the product manager communicates a lot with the customers to understand their problems, to understand their pains, and based on this feedback, decides what needs to be built. So on my daily basis, I also communicate a lot with the customer, and based on this communication, we decide which features has to be rolled out, what experience we have to provide with our product. Based on these discussions, I form the backlog, what means basically a list of features, of tasks or user stories that we need to implement to provide a good product to our customers. So as you can see, product manager job is really a creative one and a strategic one. In addition, it's not just enough to understand what the customer wants to be built, but you always have to keep in mind how does it align with the business model of your company. Because in the end, you want, of course, to satisfy your customers, but also you want that the product works for your business, so that the company can also make profit. After you decided or figure out what customer really wants and what needs to be built, the question arises how to build it. And here, where development team comes to help you, together with the designers. So in general, in a few words, how the whole process is organized, at least on my daily basis. As soon as I understand what needs to be built, for example, which feature we want to roll out, then I write concept. Or actually, initially, better to say it's not yet a ready concept, it's more like a summary of all the requirements that I get from the customers. Based on these requirements, we discuss first at concept elicitation meeting. We basically defined how the concept should look like, what is possible, what challenges we would meet, and also how this feature would fit the overall product. Then this is exactly when it is time to prepare the concept and then to refine it. Depending on the complexity of the concept, it might require a second concept elicitation meeting, and afterwards it is more or less clear how to proceed. The development basically begins. Designers should be also involved on board to understand how the interface or user experience should look like and finally work. So I, as a product manager, split the whole concept in user stories. What is a user story? It's a small story about what we want to achieve in this ticket. I make an example for you. For example, I as a user want to onboard customers just with one click to the tool. This one is actually a bad example because it's quite a broad one and it needs to be splitted depending on the available functionality of the platform in smaller user stories or tasks. So in my opinion, the better user story or example of the user story would be the following one. I as a user, once log in to the platform, want to see the possibility to onboard existing customers. This story means that we are not going to implement the whole onboarding process in one story, but rather the first step, let's say a button that would be visible to the user, and that button can be used to start the whole process of onboarding. It's always much better to split the big story or the big problem in small ones. And that's exactly where the product manager comes into the play. While preparing the user story, he has to think about how to split this big story into small steps. Then each of such stories or tasks, they're gonna be refined at so-called refinement meeting with the development team. And ideally also the designer is involved to this refinement, either before, during the preparation stage, and sometimes also he's invited to the refinement meeting where he can talk about the design part, and in case of any changes are needed, then he can react immediately. So in general, during this refinement meeting, the story is discussed. Developers are normally ask really good questions, which helps your story to be improved, and also requirements rethinked, so that it's clear what needs to be implemented and what we want to reach when this particular story is implemented, so that the scope is clearly defined and it provides no constraints to other parts of the product. Because it's always important not just to build and launch a new feature, but this feature has to fit the whole product in general. So we have to make sure that we are not introducing any new constraints to the system or to the product. So we normally work in sprints. Each sprint is about 2 weeks, so it's like 10 working days. During this time, depending on the capacity for a particular sprint, we can plan this or that amount of work that can be done through these 2 weeks. After the feature is developed, it needs to be tested. For this, QAs come into the play. So first, quality assurance testing takes place, and then after it is tested, the product manager has actually to test it as well, maybe not fully, but at least to have a look how the major acceptance criteria are met, so that the feature is really developed in the way it is expected to be developed and delivered to the final customer. In case the product manager finds some issues which was developed, he can send it back to the development or open a bug that has to be fixed before the feature will be rolled out and presented to the client. So as you can see, till now, the product manager first works on the ideation of what needs to be built. For this, the product manager works closely with the client to understand the problems and the needs. Then, based on the requirement, the product manager has to prepare the general concept, rough concept, that will be discussed with the development team at so-called concept elicitation meeting. And they are decided how this could be built, if we are ready to spend that much efforts to build it, or there are any other ways to solve the problem in easier way. After the concept is defined, the product manager splits the whole concept in tasks or user stories, and then refines each of these user stories with the development team to clear up the requirements and then plan accordingly each of these user story or task for the coming sprints. On the whole way of development the feature, the designer is also involved, so the product manager works closely with the designer to define the UI and UX. After the feature is developed, product manager is involved in the testing and then final rollout and presentation of the freshly developed feature to the client. And then basically the cycle begins again after the client provides its feedback, because very often there are still some gaps missing, or the client wanted to build something different, or it doesn't fully solve the problem the client has. So the cycle begins, maybe not from the very beginning because the concept remains, but from the point of the refinement of a particular task with the development team. When the feature is fully developed and client is satisfied, of course, we should not forget that it all needs to be documented. And this is part of work where product manager is also strongly involved to prepare the documentation of what was built and how it can be used by the user. So I would say these are the steps, the major steps that I do during my work on daily basis. As I said in the beginning, depending on the size of the company and depending on the stage at which product currently developed, depending on the amount of users you have by the moment, You might also have various duties, like for example, you could invest more time in gathering statistics regarding user experience, analyzing the data that you are getting from the users in order to be able to make the right decisions on what needs to be built or what has to be improved. I would be very happy if you share your experience. If you are working as a product manager, what are your main duties? Are they similar to what I'm doing, or they're completely different? And if they are different, what else are you doing? Thank you for watching this video, for commenting it. See you in the next one very soon.